Thanks, Karen. Who's excited for Zephaniah? Who's excited? I'm excited. I'm really excited. I think Zephaniah is just an amazing, short little prophetic book. I'm really curious as to how much the kids understood of what they were reading, because it's really quite out there, isn't it? It's a very, very confronting and challenging little prophetic book. And we're going to journey through that together for the next 3 weeks. I've decided to have mercy on the preaching team and not have them wrestle with Zephaniah. So it's going to be me for 3 weeks. So if you need a holiday from church, now might be a good time. Yeah. So why is Zephaniah so hard for us to understand? I think there are 3 things that we have to just be patient about when we approach such a prophetic book. There are kind of 3 roadblocks that we face as we look at something like Zephaniah. The first one is that we're just so tuned in to reading the Bible as a message to individuals, a message to us as just, I have to wrestle with this, I have to work out what I have to do. And we just don't think corporately. We just don't think about a message that is given to a whole nation, in fact, to the whole world, for the world and nation to understand God's purposes in this world. We just individualize it so much. And we're reading here a message that goes out to a nation. And yes, individuals need to respond, but this is a corporate message, and we need to understand it in the big picture context. The second thing that we really struggle with was really quite confronting, wasn't it? Is this idea of judgment. We don't quite wrestle with judgment. In fact, many churches have kind of skipped passages like this that speak of judgment in such gory and gruesome terms. We worship and follow a God of love, and so we shouldn't be reading or emphasizing or focusing on such a, let's face it, it's a depressing message. All mankind wiped out from the entire world. Who wants to hear that? Who wants to hear that? I was, in preparation for this, I was looking at a sermon, and he started the Zephaniah sermon. He did the whole 3 chapters in one sermon. I'm going to take my time, and we'll do it in 3. But he started his sermon with a quote from Pilgrim's Progress. How many of you have read Pilgrim's Progress? Yeah. It's hard. It's hard because it's using language that's quite old, much like Zephaniah. But he talks about how Christian is reading from this book, and this book is telling Christian that he is just a sinful, evil, condemned person. And Christian is devastated at just how bad that message is. And he's lost. He doesn't know where to turn. And that made perfect sense when John Bunyan was writing Pilgrim's Progress. But today, what would people say if they read a message about a book that condemned them and made them feel awful and their self-esteem was destroyed? What would people say today? They'd say, pick another book to read, wouldn't they? Why would you read that stuff? That's just, you don't need to listen to that. So we really struggle with this negative message. Struggle so much that we often refuse to just hear it for what it is. But we have to spend time with judgment if we're to understand God's message to us today. The third thing, I think, that makes this really hard to do is that, well, I don't know, how many of you have travelled overseas? Quite a few. How many of you have travelled overseas to a country that doesn't speak English? Is that easy? Is that easy to travel in a country that doesn't speak English at all? Communication is really, really challenging. And Zephaniah, for us, is like travelling to a foreign country where we don't speak the language at all. And it's not just a foreign country where we don't speak the language. We don't even understand the culture. We're travelling back 2,600 years to a small provincial capital city in the Middle East, and we're hearing a message that was, for all intents and purposes, done and dusted 60 years after it was delivered. A message of judgment and destruction where Jerusalem would get destroyed, and it was destroyed just 60 years later. And more than that, we're trying to understand it, and not only are they not speaking our language, they're speaking it in rhyme. This is poetry. We are so far out of our comfort zone when we get to Zephaniah. It's really quite challenging. And so we have to work hard. I'm going to give you a test, and I can see that, Associate Pastor Peter is not here. So this is a real test. The reason I say that is, for those that don't know, our Associate Pastor used to be an English teacher. And I'm going to give you a little test just to show you that when we encounter poetry, we have to think differently. We have to use a different part of our brain. I can see that other school teachers here thinking, "Nah, this will be easy." Judy, you're gonna nail this, aren't you? So I'm just going to read a poem. I'm just going to read a poem, and I want you to tell me the point of the poem. Okay? It's by a famous poet. Oh, Peyton, you're ready for this, are you? This is like, no, this. You don't think this is easy? There's no answer. Oh, you mean we should just throw it all away and not try? Okay, who wants to hear the poem? Okay, let's hear the poem, and let's see if you can tell me what this poem is about. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard. Then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou amongst the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake and die as fast as they see others grow. And nothing gainst time's scythe can make defence, save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. What's that poem about? Does anyone know who wrote that poem? Shakespeare. It sounds like that's good. Oh, okay. It's a Shakespearean sonnet. What's it about? It's about death, yeah? It's about death and old age. But he never used the word death or old age there, did he, in that poem? Did you hear that? the bare tree. Oh, okay. When lofty trees I see, barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd. It's a winter we actually have to use our brains to be able to understand poetry. And I don't know, whose brain is a bit sore now? And that was just a short, simple poem from Shakespeare that does have a meaning, doesn't it? You have multiple meanings. I think that one's pretty straightforward. He considers beauty, and he wonders whether it has any value whatsoever, because time marches on. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and nothing 'gainst time's scythe can make defence. We just get older, and we break down, and we decay, and we dissolve, and there's no defence against aging. All of those people who were once beautiful, which is everyone here, obviously, everyone. Some people still are, I'm sure. But things break down. We decay. Our bodies break down. And there's no defence. Actually, he does say that there is a defence. Did everyone pick that up? Yep. What's the defence, Andrew? Kids. Kids is the defence. Did everyone pick that up in the last line? Save breed. That's it. Save breed. The only way to stave off the inevitability of death and decay is to reproduce. The inevitability of non-existence. Yeah. It's dark, isn't it? I did choose that poem for a reason. But when we look at Zephaniah, we are looking at poetry as well. So anyway, what does Zephaniah 1 actually say? I thought the kids' reading was fantastic. I thought they did a great job. Thank you for doing that reading. I particularly liked Hayley's very, very loud, quite ironic when you think about it, "Be silent!" And actually I think at the very heart of Zephaniah 1, Hayley's verse is quite important. Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated those he has invited. Verse 7. That's at the very heart of this chapter. And it captures the big picture of what Zephaniah 1 is about. Because Zephaniah is writing to a people who, although they are distant from us in time and language and place, they're actually, I think, remarkably similar to us. Because if we look under the poetry, if we look at the language that is there, we will find a people who, even though they might go to church and say the right things and say the right prayers and do all of that, outwardly they are godly. They're living in the time of Josiah, who was the bright point in terms of bringing the people back to God. In the time of Josiah, they got this message, and essentially the people remain shallow. They're hedging their bets. They've got their other gods on the side. They're really property developers, aren't they? They're trying to get their security in wealth and housing. They could be middle-class Australians. And they don't really think that God is even concerned with what they get up to day to day. They do their religious stuff, and that's God settled. And they'll get on with their life, and they'll make their own way in the world, and they will sort out their lives. At that time, I will search Jerusalem with lamps, verse 12, and punish those who are complacent, who are like wine left on its dregs, who think, the Lord will do nothing, either good or bad. There's an irrelevancy in their attitude to God. They don't really care about him, and they're under the misapprehension that he doesn't care about them. That's what Zephaniah 1 is all about. And when at the very heart of this message he says, be silent, I'll say it loud like Haley, be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near. The Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He has consecrated those who are invited. It's a shock. It's a shock. Why is it a shock? Because the sacrifice that is being prepared, it's them. They are the sacrifice being prepared. They fail to recognize that God is king, not just in Jerusalem and Judah, but in the whole world. He is the sovereign Lord. He is the judge of all the earth. He establishes order, and when you ignore him, or when we ignore him, that order breaks down. And we only have to look around in the world today to see that that is true. That is true. And so he says, be silent. Failure to recognize him is a dangerous act. Babbling before other gods is pretty darn foolish. So just be quiet and know who God is. And that's why the language is so all-encompassing. Did you hear the language? Like all good poems, there's structure. Shakespeare's poem had, when I do count the clock that tells the time, and finishes with, in nothing against time's scythe can make defence. It's bracketed by time. Zephaniah 1 is bracketed by creation itself. Did you hear it there? I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away both man and beast. I will sweep away the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and the idols that cause the wicked to stumble when I destroy all mankind on the face of the earth. Hang on, this is just some disobedient Jews in Jerusalem, isn't it? And yet we start this message with the dissolution of creation. And we finish this message, verse 18, in the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. This is poetry, but the point that we're supposed to draw from this is that the behaviour of God's people, how they conduct themselves in this world, how they represent him on this planet, has consequences. If they fall away and God needs to start again, that has consequences for all life on earth. Creation itself is undone when God is not respected. You can actually see that there at the beginning of the book of Zephaniah. You can see day 6 of creation undone. What happened on day 6? And God created man on day 6. Undone. 5 of creation. What happened on day 5? Birds of the sky, the animals, the fish in the sea, they were all created, and God will sweep. Because really, if there's no people, there's no need to feed them. We are literally, by step, undoing creation. For those that want to know where day 4 sits, the stars in the sky and how and destroyed and what that has to do with idol worship, well, there's a Q&J session at 2:00 this afternoon, so come along and we can have a look at day 4, how creation is undone. He describes it in poetic language, yes, but the point is quite clear. There are consequences to not recognizing who God is. And verse 7 also has the other key in this message of judgment. You heard, therefore, the Lord is near. And this is a theme that all of the prophets back in that ancient time long ago spoke of. The day of the Lord, and I could list passage after passage. We did a whole sermon series in Joel last year about the day. Listen to it here. The great day of the Lord is near and coming quickly. The cry on the day of the Lord is bitter. The mighty warrior shouts his battle cry. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. It is hopeless. It is dark. It is grim, and it is coming. That is what Zephaniah is saying. I read that. How many of you have seen Lord of the Rings, the movie? Yeah, I read that, and I can't help seeing gathered on the plains before Gondor, the dark clouds rolling in and the battle cry going up as they prepare assaults on the cities. And I think Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, and he wrote it with these pictures in his head. He went through the war. And when we read The Lord of the Rings, we see a response was like in the early 19th century in language drawn from these Old Testament prophets. It's real, it's dark, and it's awful. And as that enormous force city in white, there's no hope. It is hopeless. And Zephaniah 1 is that picture of the darkness before the storm. And it's a cosmic picture. A cosmic picture. And yet, when Jerusalem fell, and when the descendants of these people were destroyed, and it was dark, and it was bleak, and it was like the First World War. It was gruesome and awful and bloody and horrible. The world didn't end, did it? The day of the Lord was not fully satisfied when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587, because if it was, we wouldn't be here talking about it right now. So that day of the Lord comes for everyone. Death will come. There is an inevitability on every person's life that judgment will come. Tolkien talked about it and wrote a majestic trilogy that describes this very picture. The New Testament looks at the day of the Lord, and it sees that it is fulfilled. And that's what Karen's second reading was about. Did you hear all the echoes of the day of the Lord when Jesus died on the cross? At noon, when the sun should be brightest, at noon darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Darkness and despair, wailing and crying. And some of those standing near heard this. They said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine, and he put on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes down, take him down." And with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. darkness and gloom, desolation and despair. Creation itself pauses. The sun stops in the sky and goes dark. All of the signs of the prophetic vision of the day of the Lord, they are there when Jesus died. And yet, my view is that the day of the Lord was more fully realized and described the night before. The night before in Gethsemane, Jesus went to a garden, and he went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place in the garden, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." And that's actually at the heart of Zephaniah as well, as we'll see over the next 2 weeks. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." That cup that he did not want to drink, that cup is the full wrath of God, the judgment that we were horrified reading from Zephaniah 1. Jesus had that cup before him, and he asked, "If there be any other way, take this cup from me." And I'm constantly shocked, as we should be shocked, at verse 43. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. Just think about that for a moment. Jesus is the sinless Son of God, and he is so cast down by what he sees before him that an angel has to come and strengthen him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Just consider that for a moment. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. His body was breaking down. The shock of what he was just given a glimpse of was enough to send him into anguish and weakness and despair that he required strengthening from heaven just to stay the course. That's what the day of the Lord is all about. The one through whom the world was created, when faced with the wrath of God, was uncreated. His body breaking down. That's what Zephaniah is talking about. When he says creation is being deconstructed and dissolved, what does that look like? That looks like our Lord praying before the torment of the cross that if there be any other way, if there be any place to hide, he would be spared. It's a big, big picture. It's a big picture. Shakespeare wrote of the ravages of time, the fleeting nature of beauty, almost the pointlessness of life. And many of us are beginning to see the ravages of time in our bodies. Yeah, it's hard. Our bodies are breaking down, just as his body broke down. We are solving because that judgment, that just judgment, that necessary consequence of the disorder that is in creation is coming home to roost. Then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou amongst the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake. My God, why have you forsaken me? And I must die as fast as they see others grow. Jesus went into that garden. He faced that judgment. He went to the cross forsaken for us. But in doing so, he achieved what God has always longed for in creation. He dissolved and died, and in death defeated death. Salvation was found on that day of the Lord. And 3 days later, he rose again. And I know that technically, given the of Zephaniah 1, I should kind of just leave you all in despair and gloom and just sit down. I can't quite bring myself to do it. Because have you ever wondered why we meet on Sunday? Why do we meet on a Sunday? It's not the Sabbath. That's yesterday. Why do we, as a body of Christian believers, meet on Sunday? Because Jesus rose from the dead, transformed and renewed and restored on Sunday. And do you know what the early Christians called this day? When the Lord's people gathered on the Lord's day, they called it the Lord's Day. Do you know what that is? It's just another way of saying the day of the Lord. We gather on the day of the Lord every week to remind us that that judgment is satisfied. Death, decay, darkness, gone. Creation restored. Everything is well with our souls. Everything is well with our souls. And that's why we meet on the Lord's Day. Even though, when we read Zephaniah 1, it's terrifying. But we're going to finish there. Maybe I'll pray and then let us sing, "It is well with our souls." Lord, we thank you for your grace towards us in Jesus. We thank you that you stayed the course, that you saw the darkness in the night, in the garden. And where we failed to honour and recognise God as King, you submitted to his will. And because of that, creation itself is restored and renewed, and we praise and thank you for all that you've done. Let's sing.